What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga, and I feel like I'm one of the last people to review it because there were no early access screenings in New York, or at least no early access screenings that I could get into. But on the off chance that you are still curious and kind of making up your mind about whether or not to go, I will stay spoiler-free initially, and then I'll give you a little warning before diving into any details. But let's get the easy stuff out of the way first. Furiosa Mad Max Saga is too long and it's not as good as Fury Road. However, it's still a kick-ass apocalyptic dystopian sci-fi saga or epic, or as they say in the trailer, do you have it in you to make it epic?
Do you have it in you to make it epic?
And yes, at nearly 80 years old, George Miller still does. And what's interesting about this one, it's told in a much more novelistic fashion. It's like 5 big chapters where you get to see how Furiosa became the person that we see at the beginning of Mad Max Fury Road. And I was pretty much entranced every step of the way. And I'll acknowledge that there are a few stylistic flourishes that were introduced in Fury Road that are now reused in Furiosa, where they're starting to get, I wouldn't say stale, but they're starting to get familiar. Like, we all have seen those shots so many times now where the camera goes in on somebody driving a car with, as they snarl into the camera. It's cool, it's dynamic, it's intense, but after 2 movies in a row where we see a lot of those shots, it's just not quite as dynamic and not quite as fresh as it was in Fury Road. And as I said in my recent video where I was tackling all my favorite ingredients from the last 4 Mad Max movies, what I've always loved about the Mad Max franchise, each movie is different from the one that came before, and each one adds a little bit more to the overall fictional setting or to the mythos. Or he always finds a way to kind of add a few more Lego pieces onto his overall creation so that Fury Road bears very little resemblance to Mad Max from 1979, and yet it all still feels like Mad Max. With this movie, while we get to have 2.5 hours in this world, there are fewer new ingredients than in the previous installments. And yet, if you just love this world and want to see yet another giant epic saga unfold in this world, it will not disappoint, because you basically have this slow building conflict between Dementus, played by Chris Hemsworth, who's an unapologetic villain in this, as well as the forces of Immortan Joe. So between the Citadel and Gastown and the Bullet Farm, all 3 of those cities are about to explode into this massive conflict. And in the middle of all this, you have Furiosa, who's indulging in a 15-year-long revenge saga. And also, let me acknowledge from the word go that Anya-Taylor has totally, completely erased any doubts that I had about her a couple months ago. One of the main reasons I was kind of doubting her is that she's just a very slender, slight person. Obviously, astonishingly beautiful, very talented, has really good taste in material, from The Witch up through like The Northman. She's always looking for and finding cool projects. But she has these enormous eyes that are so expressive that when she's got all of her, the axle grease on her face and that sort of thing, and her hair's whizzing around and fires all around her, she looks so fucking cool on camera, where it's like, you see her, she'll glare into the camera, she'll spin around, blow someone's head off. She is hell on wheels in combat, and so while I don't necessarily think she has the upper body strength to throw an elbow through someone's face, but you don't need a lot of upper body strength to put a bullet through someone's brain, or basically make it explode in pink mist behind their head. And also, I hope that this movie will put to bed that debate once and for all where people are always counting the lines of characters. I remember there was a big debate around Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, how many lines each of the actors had and blah, blah, blah. But anybody who knows the Mad Max saga will say, well, Mel Gibson in Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior had 16 lines, and he was the star of the movie. You don't need a lot of lines to be the star of the movie if you're dominating the attention of the audience at the core of the story. And Anya-Taylor in this, she has more than 16 lines, but not that much more. Most of this movie is just her communicating everything with her eyes, because throughout a lot of this movie, she's trying to hide her identity. She's trying to hide where she's from. And so more often than not, she just focuses on her work and tries to be invisible, and also tries to make herself essential and useful. And you see how slowly but surely she starts accumulating all these incredible skills that turn her into Imperator Furiosa, as we saw her when she was played by Charlize Theron. And there's no getting around the fact that if you love Charlize Theron and Fury Road, you're always going to feel a little ambivalent or have mixed feelings about her not being cast in this. If they had been taking requests, I would have just told George Miller, take 5, 6, 7, 8 years off and then do yet another movie with Furiosa and Mad Max. That's what I would have preferred, because I have just a natural bias towards prequels. Because prequels, for me, they always seem a little cautious and a little safe, because nothing too crazy is going to happen to kind of upset or change the status quo. No one's going to worry about whether or not Furiosa is going to make it to the end of the movie, because we've all seen Mad Max Fury Road. And you also get into these weird situations where you have actors that you recognize from parts from a movie that came out 9 years ago, but you're expected to accept the older version of the actor playing that character, 15 years earlier, even than Fury Road. So it's like, yeah, sorry, you are older. You don't look 25 years younger. And there are a lot of familiar faces. Like if you enjoyed the characters like the organic mechanic in Fury Road, he's back. Although he seems strangely ageless for some reason. Or the People Eater, or an actor like Nathan Jones who plays Rictus Erectus, one of the sons of Immortan Joe. In Fury Road, it looked like he just stepped out of a lab and he was just like, all just glistening muscle. And it looks like he's been, tilting back a few Victoria Pilsners and that sort of thing since then. He no longer has that sculpted muscle mass, and it breaks the verisimilitude. And maybe I shouldn't be so easily distracted by little things like that, but I just don't like prequels. Call me old-fashioned. I like movies to go forward. There are obviously exceptions. House of the Dragon is more or less a prequel to Game of Thrones, or even J.R.R. Tolkien, the book The Silmarillion, which he never intended to publish. That is basically like a 6,000-year prequel to The Lord of the Rings. So obviously, there are no hard and fast rules or laws when it comes to storytelling. But I do prefer stories to go forward, but that is not what George Miller wanted to do. And speaking of George Miller, I do want to pause for a second and call attention to something. Off the top of your head, think of what are the best movie franchises of all time that are not based on a book, not based on a comic, not based on a video game, not based on a pre-existing movie of any kind, where you have an original concept, an original screenplay invented exclusively for the cinema. And obviously people are going to say Star Wars. When George Lucas cooked up Star Wars, it wasn't remaking anything, he wasn't adapting anything. He was inspired by a variety of sources. But like when you start thinking, Planet of the Apes, that was based on a book, or The Godfather, that's based on a book, or James Bond, that's based on a book, or any superhero movie based on the comics, there are actually precious few really big franchises that are based on nothing, that are just invented for the cinema. And what makes the list even shorter, how many of those franchises that are original for the movies can you name where you've had the same director at the helm across 40 years and consistently delivering really good movies? Like, we can debate which of the 5 Mad Max movies are the most satisfying. I love the first, I love the second, like the third a little less, love the fourth, and I really like the fifth. Like, that level of consistency, that beats Star Wars. Like, Star Wars, it falls off a fucking cliff after a couple of movies. And so I think George Miller is going to go down in history as one of the most groundbreaking and one of the most stylish and one of the most interesting, just visual, visionary storytellers who tell stories in his own way. There's no other franchise out there that looks like Mad Max. And also, another one of my big concerns going into this was it going to have like a weird kind of digital AI finish to it like we worried about when we saw the trailers? Either I just stopped noticing after a couple minutes, or he did like a fresh pass on the movie toward the end. But at no point in the movie I was thinking this looks too cartoony, although there were a few digital special effects or stunts with cars where it's like, that was not a stunt because nobody could do that, but there are obviously still a lot of really cool, interesting practical stunts. Because if you tried to make a Mad Max movie without interesting practical stunts, then it just would not be a Mad Max movie. And I guess I shouldn't wallow in all my fears and anxieties about the future, but my biggest concern is that George Miller, whenever he moves on to filmmaker heaven, that there's going to be somebody who's like, oh, well, let's make 5 more Mad Max movies and just make them all kind of interchangeable and bland and increasingly just, like I said before, each of the Mad Max movies historically has added something new. But I don't want to see any other filmmakers adding anything new, and I don't want to see any other filmmakers trying to replicate the successes of the past. What I would prefer to see are more filmmakers go out and follow the example of George Miller. George Miller in the late 70s and his producing partner Byron Kennedy, they assembled this team of maniacs and scraped together about $400,000 and went off and made a movie which went on to gross about $100 million worldwide. And I feel like that's an example where people are taking a huge risk, like risking life and limb to tell an exciting story and then reaping the benefits and inventing a new franchise that has been imitated and ripped off more times than I can count. Whether you're talking about fiction or video games or TV shows or movies, Mad Max is definitely one of the most influential sci-fi franchises ever conceived for the movies in like the 125 years that movies have been around. And if you're a fan of the sci-fi genre, even if like the movie business, it seems to be struggling in 2024 and struggling mightily in many ways, it's actually been a really good year for science fiction. Like Dune Part 2 was an absolute blast. Furiosa has its flaws, but it's an absolute blast. And then a few tiers down, I would include like, Godzilla Kong, The New Empire, or Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Like, I don't even want to kind of mention them in the same category. But still, if you want to see science fiction on the big screen, 2024 so far has not disappointed on that front. But I think that's as far as I can go with my observations and critiques without offering some specificity in my comments. So if you don't want any spoilers whatsoever, it is time to bail out of this video. But let's start with the young Furiosa. The actress's name is spelled Alyla, Isla Brown. I actually was kind of blown away by just how intense and hardcore that little actress is, because a huge chunk of the first 2 chapters, just watching her get subjected to just grotesque horror after another, the things she has to bear witness to. I mean, right from the word go, we see her getting snatched up by the bad guys who work for Dementus, played by Chris Hemsworth, and we get this really cool motorbike chase where you've got a couple of people on motorbikes, and as they're getting picked off, like, they keep abandoning bikes, but as they abandon bikes, they'll grab a few vital components, add it to their own, and keep going. All while the person in pursuit, Furiosa's mother, will grab a few pieces of their gear. And it was just so cool seeing how, whether you're like a rampaging marauder out in the wastelands or from the land of plenty, that everybody's so incredibly resourceful. Nothing goes to waste. And it was one of the most interesting chase scenes that I've seen in quite some time. And also horrifically violent, really ruthless. Like, this movie holds nothing back on that front. So nobody has to worry about this movie kind of defanging or declawing the overall Mad Max tone. Then when she finally rescues her daughter and they're being chased in return, we finally get to see just how savage Dementus is going to be. And as I mentioned before, Chris Hemsworth leans into the fact that he's a villain here. We're so used to seeing him in like the Extraction series or playing Thor in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it's just a relief to see Chris Hemsworth go into the dark side and playing a charismatic villain, but a villain nonetheless, where his attitude is, after experiencing his own personal trauma and all these horrible losses, the only way he can feel anything is by inflicting just the maximum amount of terror and punishment on the outside world, so he briefly feels alive as he's watching the suffering of others. It's like, fuck yeah, like a proper villain who's not some misunderstood child and blah, blah, blah. I can't stand the modern trend of making villains not actually be villains. We can see things from his point of view, but he's somebody who takes delight in doing horrible things. And we see that early on. And with the young Furiosa, what's so intense about this performance is how Isla, whatever the hell her name is, she has this amazing way of like just staring intently at whatever's going down. She never turns away, she never winces, and you can just see all these horrors just like going into her eyes and like changing her personality, changing her soul, making her hard, giving her the ability to survive in this hellish wasteland. And the transition from her girlhood into Anya-Taylor Joy is handled so seamlessly and so beautifully. You almost don't even see the transition, because she's always like wrapped up and putting on the axle grease and that sort of thing. And also Anya-Taylor Joy is so small and slender. I was like, it took me a second to realize, oh, we've graduated to the adult Furiosa. And another source of relief for me with this movie was that neither Furiosa nor her mother fall prey to this modern trend of kind of the dour, boring girl boss that we see in every Disney show or every Marvel movie, where they have no flaws, they have no personality, they're just kind of mean and stoic and boring. And even actresses are starting to push back on, like Emily Blunt said recently when she's reading a screenplay, if like the character that she's intended to play is introduced as like, strong female character, she's like, ugh, she immediately loses all interest, because those parts are just so one-dimensional and so predictable and so boring. Actresses like playing parts that have variety and nuance and contradictions, and all those things give them something to sink their teeth into. But what's cool about both Furiosa as well as Furiosa's mother, they're tough as nails, they're savage, they're hardcore, but they're not just like the boring blank girl boss that has been far too prevalent in contemporary entertainment. And another potential creative trap that this movie very deftly avoided. A big problem with a lot of girl bosses that they never even get a bruise, they never break a sweat. They're just like boring and powerful and indestructible and blah, blah, blah. Furiosa, she gets put through the ringer in this. I mean, we all know from Mad Max Fury Road that one of her arms is not entirely the arm that she was born with. And seeing how she gets to that point, it's like, oh my Lord, we are going to the dark side, especially what's happening to her pal Praetorian Jack, played by Tom Burke, because as she's learning to drive that rig that drives down the Fury Road, both to the Bullet Farm and to Gastown, she learns a lot of those tactics from this guy Praetorian Jack, who's almost kind of like a Mad Max stand-in, but with not as much charisma or personality. But they do form a cool bond, and they are good at fighting side by side. And that was a big part of the movie. But the beautiful thing is that Furiosa, she goes to hell and back in this movie. Nobody's going to say she had it easy. Nobody's going to say that she just steamrolled over the competition. The villains are legit. The battles are for real. But speaking of battles, every Mad Max movie, eventually, no matter how cool the characters are, it's going to be judged by the stunts and the chase scenes and the fight scenes. Like, in Mad Max from 1979, it opens and it ends with some really killer chase scenes. Obviously, Mad Max 2, a.k.a. The Road Warrior, ends with that incredible chase scene with one of the greatest stunts in human history. And there's another big chase scene in Beyond Thunderdome, but I just like it less because there's way too many goddamn kids involved. And obviously, Fury Road is some of the best chase scenes that we've ever seen on the big screen. There's a major chase scene like that in the middle of the movie that I would say it's almost at the level of the Fury Road chase scenes. And maybe it would feel as if it's on that level if we had not already seen Fury Road, but our expectations obviously have been set sky high. But what's cool is that there's this new wrinkle where we're used to people with like bikes and spiked cars and all that stuff, but now we get people on parachutes and hang gliders where this is a full-blown spoiler, so plug your ears if you're still with me and you don't want spoilers, but it was almost like a water skiing stunt where one guy in the car has these little skis on his feet. He drags out behind the car on the sand where he's kind of skiing, and then he pulls the chute and rises up so they can come in and start throwing bombs at the war boys. I was like, all right, you know what? I've never seen that before. That is clever. That is surprising. So there are a few additional wrinkles and a few additional bells and whistles in the combat. So yeah, the action is awesome. I'm not going to go so far as to say that it equals the action of Fury Road, which is probably, the best action of the 21st century. But I think my favorite ingredient in the movie is Chapter 5, where initially in Chapter 5, I was like, God, these chase scenes, they're not that strong. I really hope they don't end with this battle scene because that'll feel really anticlimactic. But what I didn't realize is that George Miller was leading up to or teeing up an ending that is vaguely reminiscent of the ending from Mad Max from 1979, where Max tosses the saw to Johnny the Boy and basically gives him the choice of trying to hack through the handcuffs or hack through his leg in order to save his life.
Now, if you're lucky, you can hack through your ankle in 5 minutes.
And it's not the same choice, or it's not the same situation, but I just like how it's two characters in the desert talking shit, like sharing all their horrible perspectives on things as we slowly but surely realize what Furiosa is planning on doing. And what's interesting is how the voiceover narration, it implies, or at least it opens the door to a variety of different conflicting stories about what actually went down. So we get to see like 3 or 4 different death scenes for Dominus, each one more horrific than the one before. And the final one, I was like, okay, I think George Miller finally found something that's even more grotesque and more horrifying than being handcuffed to a car before it explodes. So it really delivered there. My only critique or complaint about the ending is that after that, suddenly it ends really abruptly. We see basically it flashes forward to Furiosa gathering up Immortan Joe's wives and then putting them in the truck and taking off. But it just suddenly stops. And I don't know, I thought the ending to Fury Road with Furiosa going up the elevator and Mad Max disappearing into the crowd was just pitch perfect. They just absolutely crushed it. So that's one of my minor criticisms of this movie overall. And also, it's just very sad not to have the real Immortan Joe in the movie. There's a new actor named Lachy Hulme. God, these names. Lachyhulme. I don't know how he says his name. He's fine. He does a good job, and obviously it's the younger version of Immortan Joe, but the original actor, he was the villain from Mad Max from 1979. He was the villain in Fury Road, and that's obviously a persona with great gravitas who is very hard to replace. So let's make some predictions about how well this movie will perform relative to Mad Max Fury Road, where I think within the kind of like the echo chamber of film freaks, everybody thinks that Mad Max Fury Road was a much greater success than it actually was. It made $380 million worldwide, which is totally respectable, but given the amount of chatter and like the religious fervor that the movie was met with, you would have thought that it had been a success on the level of Avengers Endgame, but ultimately its appeal was a little bit more niche. The people who love it intensely, but I think a lot of just kind of regular Joe Schmoes and casuals were like, what is this Mad Max nonsense? I'm totally confused why everybody's so excited. And then it picked up some awards and that sort of thing, but I think because Mad Max Fury Road is a better movie and it's a shorter movie, I think if Furiosa even can match half of what Fury Road did in terms of box office, then they can consider themselves lucky. And I'm eagerly looking forward to seeing the numbers Friday, Saturday, Sunday, because right now, like, box office is obviously down in the U.S. and it's seriously down worldwide. Like, we are lagging behind 2023 and massively lagging behind 2019. But as grim as it might be in America, it's far more so in the rest of the world. So I don't think the Furiosa is going to come anywhere close to 380 million worldwide, but I would love to be proven wrong. I would love, like, this giant, army and horde of fans of, like, screaming maniacs who worship Immortan Joe like the War Boys. I would love to see those people show up. It's interesting how, as warmly as Fury Road was received 9 years ago, in the interim, it doesn't seem like the fan base has, like, grown and swelled. Usually when you have a great movie, over time the fan base will continue to grow. It seems like the Mad Max, like, fandom might have peaked back in 1979 with the first movie. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Am I being too harsh to Furiosa? Because I think Furiosa is a really good movie, and it's probably going to be one of the best movies of the year. But because like, all the ingredients in it are going to feel vaguely familiar from a movie that came out 9 years ago, I just don't know if it's going to have quite the same impact. And it's not one of those franchises where people are always, like, screaming for the next chapter. And also, it's not the next chapter, it's a previous chapter. It is a previous chapter. It's a Mad Max Saga, as they say. And also, speaking of Mad Max, he actually is in this movie after all. His cameo is very, very brief, but the point in the movie where Furiosa is stumbling home, as you see in the trailer, like, holding onto her arm, which is missing half of it, and she's just limping across the desert. We see the Interceptor up on a cliff face, and in the exact same pose that was being struck by Tom Hardy in Fury Road, we see Mad Max just chilling, and then we cut to Furiosa waking up in this cave where this old woman is treating her with, like, maggots and for, like, infection and that sort of thing. It's totally revolting, totally disgusting. That actually is something that's new in the Mad Max universe that we did not see before. Beneath the Citadel, down in this network of caves below, you have just these monsters. They're humans, but they live like total animals, and it's just dead bodies and maggots and worms, and it's just totally gross. But this person's actually trying to help her, but we never see how Furiosa gets there, and it's implied that Mad Max scooped her up and delivered her the rest of the way to the Citadel. So while I was annoyed initially that Mad Max would not be in the 5th movie for his franchise, and most likely the last movie made by George Miller in this world, if you are a diehard devotee or just Mad Max fanatic, just be patient. You'll get one final taste of them before the curtain drops down. Also, just a quick plug for one of my earlier videos. A couple days ago, I posted a video where I celebrated my top 10 favorite moments or ingredients from the overall Mad Max franchise. Obviously, doesn't include any ingredients from Furiosa, but you will find a link to that video down below, and check it out if you want additional Mad Max commentary from this channel. But I think that's all I've got to say for now about the beautiful, expressive death angel known as Furiosa. I was very impressed by what Anya-Taylor brought to the table, and I eagerly await whatever creative decision she'll make in her career moving forward. And also Chris Hemsworth, it's just it's exciting to see him outside of the world of Marvel and outside the world of Extraction, doing really cool, interesting work. I feel like Chris Hemsworth, he's finally reached the point in his career where I think he's ready to take a lot of risks and do some really crazy things. And he's still got all of his muscles and so on and so forth, but he's in his 40s now, and hopefully the best is yet to come for both of their careers. And yeah, I was very, very impressed by both of them in this movie. But let me know what y'all think down below. Am I being too harsh? Am I being overly praiseworthy? I imagine we're gonna get a wide range of reactions to this movie. But if you enjoyed this review, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell, and I'll be back with more Furiosa discussions later on this weekend as some of the box office numbers start coming in. But thanks again for watching, and more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.